Welcome to this live cast on our future economies. Capitalism, despite the tremendous increase in worldwide welfare through its innovative power and freedom, has at the same time a number of negative consequences. A transition is necessary to overcome ecological destruction, decrease in quality of life, and growing inequality. Given geopolitical developments, Europe has an important role to play in this transition. In the livecasts, we will start an open dialogue and discuss this transition with internationally renowned economists from all over the world. Questions will pass by, such as: each week, we will discuss these matters with 2 economists, resulting in 10 online dialogues in 10 weeks, where we will share viewpoints and collect ideas on how capitalism's innovative and creative powers can go hand in hand with fostering an equal and just society. A different subject every week. Together, we can build a basis for economies that are beneficial to all of us. You can participate by putting your questions and remarks in the chat. So, let's talk.
David van Overbeek is going to interview Jonathan Taplin. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Mr. Taplin, for being here with us tonight. Your book, Move Fast and Break Things from 2017, is kind of a reference, I guess, to a slogan or a sort of mentality within Silicon Valley. Could you, before we dive into that book, quickly describe what that slogan, what the motto, what it amounts to within Silicon Valley? What does it boil down to?
Well, it's a kind of rethinking of what we used to call creative destruction. The notion is that Silicon Valley was the only really unregulated business in America. And so the ability to go and create things without anybody stopping you was raced towards that thing. And then essentially what we've got is a set of systems that only work for the platforms and don't work for all the other parts of society that goes into it. Mm-hmm. I would argue that Facebook and social media in general are a net negative to our society. Essentially, we've just gone through a very harrowing election in which the amount of disinformation, propaganda, and lies that were circulated at great volumes on social networks almost created an end of our democracy. Now, fortunately, we managed to escape that system, but it seems to me that at the core, these companies need to stop having what we call in America safe harbor. And in that sense, I think Europe is really leading. I've spent some time with Ms. Vestager, and I think she has a much better sense of what needs to be done. And when I say safe harbor, what I mean is that in the United States, if YouTube puts up a piece of music by Bob Dylan on YouTube, there's nothing Bob Dylan can do against YouTube to bring it down. He can file a takedown notice, and maybe in a week or so it'll go down, but it can go back up the next day from another user. Because essentially YouTube is saying, we have no responsibility for anything that's on our platform. Now, this is a complete lie because, as you well know, there's very little outright pornography on Facebook or YouTube. And so they spend a lot of money filtering out pornography. They spend a lot of money filtering out total incitement to violence. But they don't spend much money on filtering out just blatant untruths. And so if the same laws that applied to a newspaper or applied to a broadcasting station had applied to Facebook, Google, and YouTube, then I think there would be a lot more responsibility to police their platforms and a great deal less of the kind of crazy, I don't know if you're aware of this theory called QAnon, but it's a group of people in America who now got maybe 50 to 60% of the Republican Party believing that America is run by a secret group of pedophiles that drink the blood of children. I mean, it's like insane.
So the idea of the move fast and break things, it boils down to that these companies, they fail to take the responsibility. They fail to take, in some sense, responsibility for the broader context in which they operate, the country which provides them safe harbor, so to speak. And of course, there's a lot of talks these days about the detrimental side effects of these social media on democracy. You mentioned some of them. I guess most people have seen The Social Dilemma as well, in which this is also part of discussion, the documentary. What do you think is the most urgent issue within that that needs to be addressed right now?
Well, you mentioned before, I mean, there are two elements, one of which is, at least in the United States, to revoke both the Section 530, 230 safe harbor and the Section 512 safe harbor around copyright. If those two things were revoked, then these companies would have the financial incentive to address these things because they could be sued. And that tends to focus the mind. The second thing is to think about the nature of monopoly and whether a company like Google is really a public utility. And now we have privately held public utilities in the United States, but they're regulated. And, you know, I would cite the example in the 1950s in the United States, we had a monopoly phone company called AT&T. And we forced AT&T in 1956 to make all of the patents that it owned free to any American company or entrepreneur without license fee. So amongst those patents were the semiconductor, the transistor, the laser, the satellite system, the cellular code. So essentially, Silicon Valley was built on these free patents. Without those free patents, there would have been no Intel, there would have been no Texas Instruments, there would have been no Fairchild Semiconductor. None of the major forces like Hewlett-Packard that formed the beginning of Silicon Valley could have existed without the free patents from AT&T. So Google has a giant patent portfolio from everything from search engine algorithms to car, autonomous car vehicle patents. Mm-hmm. It has a giant patent portfolio. And if Google was made to give all of that for free to any other American company, I think we would see a lot more competition, which is essentially what Rana's book is about. We need competition. Regulation can help, but as she points out, the regulators end up getting captured quite often by the people they're regulating. So we need true competition. If Facebook had to compete with Instagram and WhatsApp on things like privacy, it might be a much better system.
Now, on the other hand, you could say that big tech is sort of recognizing the problems that they are causing, the problems they are facing with respect to society, and they're trying to reach out, begging sometimes almost to help them out, to regulate them. Please help regulate us. Google puts out white papers, for example, asking society to help out with the moral dilemmas that they encounter. Do you find this plea of them to be honest and convincing?
No. It's a PR strategy. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't really want Facebook to be regulated. If the safe harbors were revoked, he would spend hundreds of millions of dollars to reverse that. Just like in California passed a law that said that employees of firms like Uber and Lyft had to have, pensions and had to have be considered actual employees, not independent contractors. Uber, Lyft, and a few other companies spent $100 million fighting that successfully last Tuesday.
Yeah.
And now, once again, they're free to completely exploit their employees.
Now, some people say that we should, that if we want a solution to this, it has to come from Silicon Valley as well. That we need more technology, so to speak, in order to solve this problem and some of the societal problems that these technologies have caused. Well, if I understand you correctly, it's not just regulation that needs to be enhanced, because that's not enough. Actually, it needs to be more competition. We need to create, for example, our own big tech firms, new big tech firms that can compete with these firms. Of course, tonight we're also talking about Europe, and I was wondering what you're thinking about that. As Natasha mentioned, here in Europe, we don't have our big tech giants. But is there an opportunity for Europe there? And should it perhaps create an environment in which these big tech giants can foster and can grow?
Well, I mean, not to say that the Chinese are any shining light of open society, but certainly China has its own champions in every space that it has led. And there's no reason to me that the European Union couldn't have a search engine that was much more attuned to people's privacy than Google is. And to me, that would be a good use of social capital and European investment to do that. But also, Europe can play a great role in just leading in the regulation field. Although I'm skeptical about the ability to regulate in the United States, I'm not skeptical about the ability, the force that the EU has had in changing conduct. I have to give permission for companies to take my information now. Before your GDPR, we never had to do that. Mm-hmm. So you are making an effect on the whole world by imposing certain regulations that, needless because of the nature of the internet, then become worldwide regulations.
So should we, for example, also consider to convert the big internet platforms to public utilities? How
I don't think you can do that. But I do think you can make them, for instance, pay producers of content a legitimate rate of money in order to do that. I mean, one of the things that concerns me most about what big tech has done is it's created a new class of people, which economists are calling the precariat. And that is people who, on one hand, work above the API and tell computers what to do. And below the API are people that computers tell them what to do. That's the kid that drives your Uber or the person that works in the Amazon warehouse. Mm. Those people have no healthcare, no unions, no security of any kind, no pensions. And they're essentially forced to be freelancers in a way that giant companies usually had to have some responsibility for their employees. And of course, Uber or Lyft or Amazon has no responsibility for its employees and gives them no benefits whatsoever. So, we are creating this precariat. Put aside the horrible effects on the culture that it's had, as I pointed out in my book. It used to be you could make a living selling recordings as a musician. You cannot do that anymore. You have to be on the road 200 days a year in order to survive.
Thank you, Mr. Taplin. Looking forward to the next part of the discussion where we will have a broader discussion with Ms. Verhoogar as well. Thank you for now.